Hey guys, in this video I am going to talk to you about how to decide what the independent and dependent variables of a scenario are. This shouldn't really be new to you guys. I believe you talk about it in biology. So we're just going to kind of extend that lesson into math. Super exciting stuff. All right, so let's start with some definitions. An independent variable is the one that stands alone. In other words, it's the one that you can manipulate. The dependent variable, on the other hand, is the one that definitely depends on the independent variable. That's why it's called dependent. So the dependent variable is the one that changes in response to the independent variable. So like I said, the dependent variable depends on what the independent variable is. So real quick, I just want to do a little bit of a sketch here of a graph because you're going to have to be able to tell the difference on a graph as well. The independent variable is always found on the x-axis. And the dependent variable is always on the y. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a line here. But what's important here is you know that independent is always on the x and dependent is always on the y. All right, so we have an example here. It says the amount of money you earn depends on how many hours you work. So the amount, you see the word depends here. The amount of money you earn directly depends on how many hours you work. So the amount of money that you earn would be the dependent variable. On the other hand, the number of hours you work is independent. So if you go back to the definitions that we talked about a second ago, your boss mostly decides how many hours you would work, but in some cases you can decide how many hours you work, and depending on how many hours you work, that's how much money you'll make. That's why this is independent. All right, so now we have a few more examples down here at the bottom. It says in the following situations, circle the independent variable and underline the dependent. So I am going to do independent in purple and dependent in red. I guess I should underline this part too. All right, number one, your grade on a test and the number of hours you studied. So when I go through these, most of the time I think about, okay, well, which one do I actually have a say in? Which one can I manipulate? So the two variables are grade on a test and number of hours studied. I decide how many hours that I study. So that is going to be my independent variable. So number of hours studied is independent. And my grade on the test typically depends on how many hours I do study. So that makes that the dependent variable. 2, the number of games played and the number of points scored. All right, again, you would decide how many games you play. So the number of games played is going to be independent. And the number of points you score typically depends on the number of games that you play. So that would be the dependent variable. 3, the amount of food you eat and the weight you gain. Obviously, there are some other factors that kind of play into this type of scenario, but we want you to focus just on food's relation to the amount of weight that you gain. So you decide the amount of food that you eat, and the weight that you gain depends on the food you eat. All right, last one, the time to complete a task and the number of people working on the task. Now, this one's a little bit tricky. 99.9% of the time is an independent variable. But in this case, it is not. The number of people that work on the task is independent. You are choosing how many people work on this task. And the more people you have, typically the less time it takes for you to complete that task. So the time to complete the task is dependent on the number of people working on that task. And that's it. That's how you decide the difference between independent and dependent variables.